Two people are standing next to each other. One is nearly 2 meters tall. The other barely reaches his shoulder. One has skin that burns in an hour of sun. The other has never burned in his life. One can drink a glass of milk with no problem. The other gets sick from the same glass. And somehow, despite all of this, they are, genetically speaking, almost exactly the same person. So here's a question almost nobody actually thinks through. If we're all human, why do we look this different? Why do bodies, skin, height, even how we react to alcohol, vary this much across the planet? The answer isn't about different kinds of people. It's about one species, scattered across wildly different worlds, slowly reshaped by the places it landed. Let's go back to the beginning. 70,000 years ago. At that point, every human on Earth lived in Africa, and almost nobody looked different from anybody else. In fact, here's something that sounds backwards, but is completely true. The genetic diversity inside a single African population at that time was greater than the diversity among every human being alive today. Think about that. One group of people living in one region carried more genetic variation than the entire 8 billion humans currently spread across the globe. Then something happened. Small groups began leaving Africa. They crossed deserts, they crossed mountains, they followed coastlines, they pushed into forests they'd never seen before. And they had absolutely no idea what kind of world was waiting for them on the other side. That decision, made by a relatively small number of people, is the starting point for every physical difference you've ever noticed between human beings. Because once those groups scattered, the environment took over. Let's start with heat. In the hot savannas of Kenya, the Maasai people developed something remarkable. Average male height around 183 centimeters, with long arms and long legs. At first glance, that just looks like a tall, lean build. But it's actually a cooling system. A taller, leaner body has more surface area relative to its volume, which means more skin exposed to air, which means heat escapes faster. This isn't unique to humans either. You see the same principle in animals. Foxes living in hot climates evolve larger ears specifically to release heat, while foxes in cold climates evolve smaller ones to conserve it. The Maasai body shape is doing the exact same job. Hot environments across species tend to favor tall, slender bodies built to cool down quickly. Now go to the opposite extreme. Dense rainforest. The Mbuti people of the Congo rainforest have an average male height of around 144 centimeters. That's nearly 40 centimeters shorter than the Maasai average. And it's not random. It's the forest doing the selecting. In thick vegetation, a smaller body moves more efficiently. Less mass to push through dense brush. Less energy spent navigating tangled undergrowth. Smaller bodies also generate less internal heat, which matters enormously in a rainforest, because humid air makes sweat nearly useless. Sweat cools you down by evaporating, and in a rainforest, the air is already so saturated with moisture that evaporation barely happens. So instead of relying on a cooling system that doesn't work well there, natural selection favored bodies that simply produced less heat in the first place. Compact, energy efficient, agile. The forest rewrote the human body to fit its condition, so heat shaped one set of bodies. Forest density shaped another. But what happens when the challenge isn't heat or vegetation, but the air itself? Go up to 4,000 meters above sea level, and oxygen is genuinely scarce. Most people who travel there experience headaches, dizziness, sometimes serious illness. Two populations on opposite sides of the planet, Tibetans in the Himalayas and the Aymara people in the Andes, faced this exact same problem, and they solved it in two completely different ways. The Andean solution was to upgrade the blood itself, larger lungs, more oxygen-carrying molecules circulating through the bloodstream, a dramatically increased ability to absorb whatever oxygen was available. It works, but it comes with a cost. That thicker, oxygen-dense blood can create health complications over time. Tibetans took an entirely different route. Their blood looks almost identical to someone living at sea level. Instead of thickening their blood, they changed their breathing. Faster breaths, deeper breaths, pulling in significantly more air with every single inhale, compensating for thin air through sheer respiratory efficiency rather than blood chemistry. Same mountain. Same lack of oxygen, same species. Two completely different biological solutions built independently by evolution with no instructions and no communication between the two groups. And here's where the story gets genuinely strange. Scientists studying Tibetan DNA found something they didn't expect. A specific gene that helps with high-altitude survival. But when they traced where that gene came from, it wasn't from modern humans at all. It came from the Denisovans, an extinct human relative that hasn't walked the earth in tens of thousands of years. At some point, ancient humans and Denisovans interbred, and that interbreeding passed a literal survival tool from an extinct species directly into the ancestors of modern Tibetans. A gene from a species that no longer exists is still, right now, helping people breathe at altitudes that would leave most of us gasping. Evolution didn't just shape the Tibetan body from scratch. It borrowed a solution from a completely different branch of the human family tree. Now let's talk about something almost everyone on the planet has an opinion about. Milk. Originally, every human being lost the ability to digest milk after childhood. That's actually the default setting for mammals. You drink your mother's milk as an infant, and then your body stops producing the enzyme needed to break it down. But around 7,500 years ago, in Eastern Europe, a mutation appeared that let some adults keep digesting milk for their entire lives. At first, this was just a random genetic quirk, but then people started herding cattle and sheep. Suddenly, milk wasn't just baby food. It was a stable, reliable source of nutrition during seasons when other food sources failed. People who happened to carry that mutation could rely on milk when others couldn't, which meant they survived harder years more often and had more children who inherited the same trait. Within a few thousand years, that one random mutation had spread through most of Northern Europe. But here's the part that really proves this is about environment, not race. The exact same ability, adult milk digestion, evolved completely separately in Africa. Among the Maasai and Fulani peoples, different mutations, completely unrelated to the European one, produced the identical result. Two unrelated populations, facing the same opportunity, herding animals, accidentally evolved the same solution using entirely different genetic code. That's not a coincidence. That's evolution solving the same problem twice, independently, because the underlying logic of survival doesn't care what continent you're on. Here's another one almost everyone has witnessed but never thought about. Why do so many people of East Asian descent turn red after drinking alcohol? Nearly half of East Asians carry a gene that affects how the body processes alcohol. When you drink, your body converts alcohol into a toxic compound before eventually breaking it down further. This particular gene slows down that second step, which means the toxic compound lingers longer than it should. The result is the flushed face, the discomfort, the reaction that makes drinking heavily genuinely unpleasant. For a long time, this just looked like an unfortunate genetic glitch. But there's a historical theory that makes it make sense. As rice farming expanded across ancient China, stored water frequently became contaminated. Fermented drinks, because of the alcohol content, were often safer to consume than the local water supply. But if a gene made heavy drinking deeply uncomfortable, it may have quietly discouraged overconsumption while still allowing people to drink in moderation. People who didn't overdrink may have survived and reproduced at slightly higher rates. Across enough generations, that small advantage spread. What looks today like an awkward party inconvenience may actually be an ancient built-in safeguard against alcohol abuse. Now let's look at something far darker. The Black Death. When the plague tore through medieval Europe, it killed close to half the population in just a few years. Entire villages vanished. But here's what's strange. People standing side by side, breathing the same air, exposed to the same disease, experienced wildly different outcomes. Some people carried a mutation that altered a receptor on the surface of their immune cells, a receptor the plague bacteria needed in order to break in. With that doorway partially closed, those individuals were significantly more likely to survive. And because they survived, they passed that mutation on to their children. Here's where it becomes almost unbelievable. Centuries later, scientists discovered that this exact same mutation does something else entirely. HIV uses that very same receptor to enter human immune cells. People carrying the mutation that helped their ancestors survive. The plague turned out to be highly resistant to HIV infection as well. Several documented cases of patients being effectively cured of HIV involved bone marrow transplants from donors who happened to carry this medieval mutation. A genetic defense built by one catastrophe centuries ago, quietly waiting inside human DNA, ready to fight a completely different enemy that didn't even exist yet. So, when you put all of this together, heat shaping body proportions, rainforest shaping body size, altitude rewriting breathing and blood, farming changing digestion, alcohol shaping metabolism, plague reshaping immunity, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. None of this is about different types of people. It's about one type of person encountering wildly different environments and adapting in completely logical ways every single time. And here's the number that puts everything in perspective. All human populations on Earth are genetically about 99.9% identical. The visible differences we notice, height, skin tone, blood reactions to altitude or alcohol, all of that comes from roughly 1% of our total DNA. Even people who look almost nothing alike are, underneath all of it, overwhelmingly the same. Most of what makes you human hasn't changed since your ancestors were walking out of Africa 70,000 years ago. Your body is not separate from history. It's a record of it. Every trait you carry, the way you process milk, the way you react to alcohol, how easily you sunburn, how your lungs handle thin air, is a small encoded story about what your ancestors had to survive in order for you to exist at all. And evolution hasn't stopped. It's still running, quietly, right now, in ways future generations will eventually be able to read in their own bodies the same way we're reading ours today. We are not separate kinds of humans scattered across the planet. We are one species, told in thousands of different dialects of biology, all writing back to the same origin point. Every difference you've ever noticed between yourself and someone from another part of the world isn't proof that we're not the same. It's proof of exactly how far one species can travel and how many different ways it can learn to survive without ever stopping being human.